Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. We are a select quality group, hopefully. So this seminar is by Ashraf Pulikkamath. I think most of the people who are attention I'll just read a brief background of his work. He's currently a Ratan Tata Post-Doctoral Fellow with the India Observatory, which is in the LSE International Inequalities Institute, which I'm guessing the ODI fellows know about as well. We have two ODI, both of you are ODI, I'm guessing. Or one of you is ODI.
Yeah, but not fellows, but yeah, from the ODI. Yeah.
So good to have ODI staff also here. But where does Ashraf come from? He's with the, he's an assistant professor of economics at the School of Social Sciences and Humanities. And I don't know how many of you have heard of Vellore Institute of Technology. Bizarrely, the name of the institute has the V, which is Vellore, which is actually one place in Tamil Nadu. However, it's one of the largest and quite well-respected private universities, mostly in South India. So they now have campuses in Chennai or Madras, as I still call it. They also have a campus in Andhra Pradesh. And Ashraf is actually from the Andhra Pradesh VIT, which is based in Vijayawada, I think. But he also has been at Madras University. So he's from Kerala, been at Madras University, and currently in Andhra. So he very well represents the south of India. And his topic, I think, is we are here because we are all interested in this topic. It's on gender budgeting and the political economy of inherited inequality in India. That's the focus of his work. And thank you all again for coming here on this hot summer of London. And with that, I hand you over to Ashraf.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for the lovely introduction. And I think that I can leave an explanation maybe. The inherited inequality is an adapted term mostly from Chico's work that, as you might know, that we have been having some interactions in the beginning of my term at LSE. Then the rest of the things are mostly my work that some of you might remember seeing it, at least Peter for sure, I think, through my blogs. So why should somebody talk about gender budgeting in India or in the globe or somewhere in public finances? Quite repeated question to me that if you look at public finance, which was gender neutral in the past, or deemed to be gender neutral, like any other economic theories are, then contested long-term. Then there was a call for action in 1995, Beijing Platform for Action by the UN. And then in early 2000s, countries started adapting gender aspects into budget. There are many versions of gender budgeting. There is no precise format of how gender budgeting is done in public finance. But if you look at the global map, there are two things that can be observed, that the prominent or adopted gender budgeting countries are all in the global south, if you avoid the Nordic countries. Secondly, India is one of the prominent gender budgeting country, probably the largest. Now, what does it make more interesting? And of course, Kerala, if you do not know, Kerala is somewhere at the tip of the South India. It's a peninsular zone, and which is famous by its human development indicators, select indicators in terms of primary education, health, or sex ratio. Now, it's prominent gender budgeting country, and there is gender budgeting. Okay, I should define gender budgeting also, at least from Indian perspective, that we look at it like we allocate funds for betterment of women is gender budgeting. So of the total budget, you have a precise share of that total expenditure is falling on women incidentally, benefiting them, ideally empowering them, but most of the time giving them welfare. Okay, that's one other reason that I suppose that most of the global south countries have gender budgeting, because it was rather easy for these countries to amalgamate all the welfare policies put together for women and say it's gender budgeting. pretty much India adopted it, and it has adopted it quite excessively across the union budget. We have a federal system, so there is a central budget of the India. Then there are state budgets with a lot of autonomy for the states, and then there are local governments. And in India, most of the times, or in South India at least, most of the times, even the local governments mimic what the center or state is doing. So it's extensive. Now, from there, I'm looking at marriage assistance for marginalized women. Now, why marginalized women or why scheduled caste and scheduled tribe? Okay, it's so happen in India that you look at only one screen. So I'm turning around. Okay, there is a screen here. So marriage grant is incidentally in Kerala. Marriage grant is it's a one of a lump sum grant that you get once in lifetime. And you are legal marital age and you belong to either scheduled caste or scheduled tribe. Now, scheduled caste and tribe are the lowest tier of social hierarchy in the caste system in India, unique to India or in South Asia. So they were earlier untouchables in the caste hierarchy, or they were Adivasis, indigenous who were not in the mainstream of the society. And ever since India is the Republic of India, the unified modern India, we are trying to mainstream them through a lot of constitutional efforts, including reservations in education and employment. Nonetheless, I argue that policies appears to be maintaining the margin, let's say something that reflect as an inheriting inequality throughout the system. Now, why it is a single most problematic issue that I could raise is that if you look at, in the budget in India, you'll get to see that there are allocations for women, then within women, the normal women, general women, backward caste women, scheduled caste women, scheduled tribe women, there are subcategories. So if you look at the subcategory, and analytically in Indian public finance, SC/ST is one group together. And this group has separate, say, subdivision within which you will get to see what is most of the fund going to. It is to marriage grant recently. It was earlier education and health put together, which is decreasing. And marriage grant is actually sustaining and slightly increasing over time. That's a problematic situation because marriage reinforces all the marital, caste, patriarchal expectations within the society. Now, there are two contradicting traditions on Kerala's development. Okay, if you have been familiar with Amartya Sen at least, I think he draws on a lot of Kerala model from India, which says basically a paradoxical development where social development indicators were relatively better to the other states of India, except the income part, and which is stated as a model that even when you don't thrive in terms of per capita income or GDP, that is not great with Kerala, the social development indicators can actually make up. There are contestations that there are a lot of historic advantage that the region had. And if you look at the established, I'm not saying Amartya Sen was all celebratory, but then the attention towards sense works is largely drawn on Kerala's celebratory model, and there are a lot of replica of that from Indian economists like Ramachandran or Lekha Chakravarti. All the citations are indicative. All their later works have drawn to this argument. Now, this is a prominent economist narrative. Look at the alternative that the first person, Kunyaman, which might not be very familiar for you, is a subaltern economist hailing from Kerala. And he openly contested, for example, Sen, saying, but it's just not in the mainstream, saying that it's rather a phantasmagoria, a fanfare following a model, which has a lot of inequalities within it, and it reproduces margin or inherent inequality. So he was one of the representatives from the scheduled caste in the Republic of India and Kerala, and he ran through even through his autobiography about both economics and social narratives parallel, and explained how the inclusive welfare in the state has kept the margins at the margins, not moving beyond the margins. Pravina Kodath, I'll come to her a bit later with more details, has already established that there is a patriarchal marriage related structure that the society in India in general wanted to reproduce. And if government is stepping in to help the marriage, then it's inevitably reproducing inequality. Devika is a historian turned development studies person, and she argues that gender paradoxes are there across all welfare policies of Kerala, be it political or economic. Sharika Tirangama is a political scientist. She's actually from USA. I mean, her works are from USA, but then she called that caste is inherited in private in her recent work. That is a monster in those marginalized people's path. That even though you don't get to see the caste contested in the public sphere, which is illegal in India, it is quietly in the private and it's sustained. So I say that there are contesting arguments and there is quite a bit of overlap where I put in my gender budgeting argument that to say that what government shouldn't be doing in this context. That's it. It's more of a story, less of data. I mean, you can be relaxed. So coming back to Kodos, she was actually the Sir Ratan Tata Fellow in 2005 in LSE. And in 2006, her work that has been submitted here has actually inquired about something similar to what we discussed today. It's not exactly gender budgeting. Gender budgeting didn't get instituted then, but it was a welfare policy. And her work actually draws on an ethnographic approach in a particular village in Kerala. And she says that the conjugal power structure is actually reproduced by the government assistance for marriages in the name of economic vulnerability. In a way, these are the works, basically the original work and the polished work that was published later with Development and Change. And in a way, unintentionally, we are revisiting what Kodak predicted with a bit of gender budgeting data. The gender budgeting didn't exist at the time, and it's 20 years ago, and the policy was quite rudimentary then, and it was fragmented and it was not institutionalized, it was not very popular. It was like, say, for example, local government can take up a part of their fund to assist the scheduled caste for their marriage. Now it has evolved into a massive structure. And in the original public finance and budgets and gender budgets, which is actually supposed to be there for gender mainstreaming or empowerment, or at least to give welfare for women, has been enormously put on something against it. Now the puzzle, can gender responsive finance reinforce inequality instead of transforming it? I argue it can. The framing, for example, if you see, this marriage grant falls in part A, which is 100% women beneficiary scheme, that it intend to make the benefits for women for 100% of the money it has spent. Now, does the money move through directly to the women and her agency or autonomy is increasing out of the money? The answer is difficult. It actually navigates through caste, gender, and marital institutions, which are all patriarchally determined. Neither the caste, nor the family, nor the marriage is actually women-driven in the general context of care. Okay? So an excerpt from a case 224 that as a bride, she was not involved or informed about this at all. She had no idea that this scheme exists and there is money coming in and it's operational, etc., etc. So what is the problem? Targeted at SC/ST women, gender progressive in policy, and it's pegged at age 18, which is problematic age. I argue that in Indian education system at 18, you are correctly finishing your 12th class in school, which is actually an attained level of education in South India. Okay, unlike North India, in South India, almost everyone goes to school and the school is almost free and you get to go till 12. And legally, you have to wait until 18 to get married also. So it's rather mandatory you get this secondary education. And now what is on the ground? It's the applicant of the grant is father, assuming that the girl is about to get 18. So she's not an adult and she cannot make up the applicant. So then the father is the applicant. Nonetheless, even if you're 25, the father is the applicant of the scheme. The men get it. And the marriage in general is concentrated, as far as my interviews are concerned, between 18 to 20. And it's largely absorbed into dowry that comes in terms of gold, gift, or sometimes indebtedness that arise out of all of these customs. That is the puzzle. I suppose I'll not run out of time. So what is analytical frame? Again, a story that inherited inequality tradition, especially the normative supposition that Chico gives, that there are unfair disadvantages that you are born with. And then we can move to Sen and Sen's tradition, or the feminist tradition of Fraser or Naila Kabir, that clearly says that agency is beyond resources. Resources is itself not converting into agency. That need a push. It's a process. And the resources should be given according to the social conditions where you kind of make up the resources to become an agent of the resources, which again resembles what Sen or Dries argues. Now that is the framing. And when you move from there to Indian context, okay, right from Ambedkar, who is the father of our constitution, back in 1916 or 36 itself, he says that marriage is problematic in Indian subcontinent, that it is highly caste determined, that we are not very open. We, when I say the larger Hindu community that still sustain the marriage within the caste system or the Hindu traditional system, is not very open to intercaste marriages even today. There are actually parallel incentives to intercaste marriages, even out of SC/ST category. If the SC/ST, say, make an intercaste marriage with another caste person, you still get kind of a similar incentive, but then it's not very popular. And there are many such schemes in India, but it's not very popular, or it's not rather socially accepted. Even if in India, marriages are arranged by the families, parents, not by the couples per se. It's not, again, widely not accepted that you kind of select your bride or groom and then you make up the marriage. No. So Ambedkar says all of these things back then a century ago. And recently in the early 2000s or in early 90s, Gopal Guru or Sarukai, there are many, before Kodot, there are many scholars from South India. Kunnath, for example, George Kunnath's early work from FC. All of this actually says that the marginalized community in India is actually in the circle of their own caste because they are not welcomed by their caste in the first place. And for marriages, it's a strict no-no. Whatever over it may be, it can be even sometimes that you can marry someone from another religion or race or another country, but not from a lower caste. Now the Kerala's political economy, which is celebrated, is becoming problematic because you might know that Kerala was Kerala's first government in 1956 back then was globally, I think I'm making it correct, that it was the first globally elected Marxist government, democratically elected Marxist government. And it has a lot of phantasmagoria behind that. It's a pro-socialist, pro-Marxist, very much politically aware, mainstreamed, and kind of society that is modern or progressive. And Kunyaman actually sharply questions that. Kunyaman is somebody who actually lived along Kerala, that he was born around mid-70s, if I'm not wrong, or end of 60s, and lived his 60, 70 years of work as the Kerala progressed after the famine, poverty, all the issues that India or South India generally had. In the good time, he was born and then he lived through. And he contested across saying that, see, the narratives that you see for Kerala as is better, relatively better, human developed, socially progressive, politically left aligned. All of them are true for a middle class in India, which is equivalent to middle caste in India, which will be not lower caste, not upper caste necessarily, but the middle caste. So the political economy is so powerful with the middle caste, not with the lower caste. And then he argued that the system was created in a way that the margins are remained margins. For what purpose? Again, the social hierarchies are not existent constitutionally. So you don't get to discriminate against somebody in the name of caste, saying that you do this work. But it can be tactically done again by inheriting inequality. So the system can ensure that you won't move beyond a particular level of education or skill, which is primarily backed by economic vulnerability, but then it is reproduced through the system. That's the problem. So you can move to graduation, for example, or you can be upskilled. You can go into other works that are not your caste aligned work, but you need upskilling for that. In the first instance, you are not very welcomed. Kunyaman himself was an economist, despite the fact that he was quite a prominent academician. He was not welcomed in the Kerala's prime academia, even today. And he narrated towards end of his life. He is no more in the autobiography, part of the autobiography, saying that, see, I didn't want to get a seat just because I'm coming from a vulnerable community. So most of the times there are this tokenism also that some of these people pick up based on tokenism, but not based on a mainstreaming idea. The mainstreaming hasn't happened. It is systemically excluded. He explains that when I kind of get into an institution for betterment of my life or breaking the cycle of the social vicious disempowerment cycle, they are not welcomed or they are discouraged, saying that you are here because of the reservation, you are here because of that fund, this fund, etc. Kunyaman does not talk about gender a lot, but if you look at women, then they are at the double disadvantage. Kunyaman himself was a man. And Kodot obviously explains this from a feminist angle, that it's problematic. Tirangama, Sharika Tirangama, who is not a Keralite, I think she is Sri Lankan origin, not a Malaya, not from Kerala at all, actually interrogated into this question in the very own site where I conducted my interviews, which is a district called Palakkad. I mean, it was again coincidental. I didn't know Sharika and her work before I arrived at LSE. And it's a 2026 recently published work. She interrogated all of these things in 2026, quite parallel it should have been. My work and her work should have been parallel in the ground. Inquiring into the private rooms, and she has an advantage of being women. I am not being women, has a disadvantage into interrogate into many things, though my colleagues helped me a lot with it. But she says that in all the private rooms out in the homes, there is a gender hierarchy. That in the out, you might not see it, but in the private rooms, they exist and they operate, and all of the decisions are based in that. Devika was a long-term contestant of the Kerala model, as far as I know, throughout her work, that the Marxist socialist regime of Kerala is actually problematic. It nurtured the upper caste or middle caste hierarchy to the lower caste hierarchy through the government system. We had more left governments compared to central left or right. We never had a right-wing government. So Kerala had left or central left government. The extreme left governments have been problematic is what Devika argues, not me, okay? Now, I'll dive into my data that I've interviewed 70 beneficiaries or their proxies, as you see on the table. And then there were 20 follow-up qualitative interviews with the stakeholders who are involved, right from the finance department of the government to the village officer who is associated with disposal of the money. So inevitably, 90% of these people are beneficiaries. And some of them are their proxies, as in terms of mother, husband, or father, or so on and so forth. So most of my arguments are based on these 70 qualitative interviews. And I'll show you a bit of backdrop from a secondary data set, Demographic and Health Survey, which is a global database. So what is a problem? Problem is a secondary school paradox, that most of the people, more than half, has already been over secondary school educated. As I told you, for the precise reason that it is compulsory. Follow the highlight will be easier, I think. It's a lot of content, I know. So the median age at marriage or mean age at marriage, you see, it's 20. And I should rather be cautious saying that they have to report an age after 18 because otherwise it's illegal. They will never say to a surveyor that they got married before 18. But in the counter narratives, who are not a part of the benefits, when we interrogated them with the questions and interviews, they said they got married even before 18 and then it was regularized after 18. So indicating necessarily when you get married is not an issue, but then where the school or higher education is going for at all. So married at 18, 20, as I already shown you, and the husband, there is a male advantage within the community. Say if you look at the mean age difference with the groom is 6, which is 18 plus 6, 24 or 25. Depends the community that the man usually get a window to get transitioned into some employment or for higher education. Again, all of them are not utilizing it or it's not very well converted, but then the window exists for men compared to women. And monthly income and the grant amount is actually quite huge. One-time lump sum grant to 1 to 2 lakh rupees as of today is actually a lot. In India, according to old tax regime, if you look at 2.5 lakh per annum is your tax filing income. That you don't have to pay taxes, but you start filing. So I don't think there is any other scheme that actually pumped a one-time lump sum grant this much at once to a family in India. Even for if you have housing allowances that you get some partial fund for constructing a house if you're extremely poor, but it comes in parts, which is not a lump sum, not in lakhs. It comes in bits and pieces. Anything else that I'm missing on? No. So most of the marriages, incidentally or for sure, it's family decided, more than 80%. And most of them are not working expected. Most of the fund was utilized in around 80% is in marriage related debt, which if you inquire further is into the debt associated with the gold. And the reason is that the fund in this is in the government system, the fund usually get realized after the marriage is over. That you apply before marriage, but you need to show the proof of the marriage. So you need the photographs or videographs, etc. So it incidentally comes after the marriage so that there is a bit of debt associated with it. So now it all aligns with the story that I have narrated so far. Now, there are probably 3 trajectories through which you can look at it. I mean, that I look at it. One is the immediate punishment is that the foreclosed trajectory where 41% of the total interviewees are there who got married immediately after 18 legally, and 100% of them were family decided. It's very obvious that I don't have to state that at 18 you don't decide about your marriage when it is actually something that the family involved. You don't have the agency or voice to talk about your own marriage at 18 or just after your school. It's again, I recall that it's all from India. The system is too different there. If you're still wondering, is marriage a big thing? So in the category where it is foreclosed, there is 0% graduate or 0% higher education has happened in that category. So it's often an argument patriarchally that education can be done even after marriages. Marriage is just one life incident and you can get married and you can continue to be a companion and be working or studying. It hasn't happened. And 0% of them are working too. And there is a apparent reason that the fertility immediately follows after marriage. So most of the instances, immediately after the marriage, in the next year, you have a children. You have a couple of children, then your prime time from 18 to the 2024, where men actually start to get married, is the time where you get married and nurture children or bear children. So one of the illustrative case 6 says that getting married is the ultimate expectation of the society. Everything else is secondary. Everything else is secondary, I insist. Now we'll move to second group who actually crossed the higher education path, but didn't get converted. They are stalled. Why they are stalled? They are stalled because of the marriage. They say that after my PG, or there are even PhDs in some cases, the husband didn't allow. Whatever course has been ongoing was continued and completed. But after that, the husband didn't allow me to work or move or do anything after that. Case 37. And it's quite, the excerpts are all like similar across all the cases. Those are just indicative. Now, there is a 10% who got converted into post-graduation or graduation, and they are working also. They are a minority, I call. And there is a selective mechanism which works as in terms of there is a sponsor, either as a father or the husband himself, but which is a very rare case, which I'll explain a bit later. Now, if you look at the percentage across, I mean, in general cases, all 70 people saying if wherever there is not all the 70 reporting, there is a footnote following how many are presenting. This actually adds up into 77%, and there is a 23% who are nowhere. Actually, they are a mixed group because it's qualitative. Coding was difficult. So what are they doing? Some are working without higher education or working with the school education that they had against my argument. So, but then why are they working? Working is not empowered. Working due to impoverishment, due to the failure of husband as the breadwinner. They start working. Or some self-decided to get married or to get educated, but again, it didn't work after that. They are also not working now. Some late married, and it doesn't still match up with higher education or employment. So there are chaotic situations, and it actually means to say that agency is not equal to conversion either, or working doesn't mean that it is empowered, or getting married early is not necessarily punishing, but only in case of 20% of people. But the 80% case remains. Yeah, I should run through. This counter narrative would be interesting. Okay, these are the set of people I told you that these are the group who actually quite naturally emerged in the site while we were discussing because they were educated. I mean, they as in the men counterpart, okay, not women. Now, all of them are pseudonyms. All of them got married at 18, reportedly, but before 18. And most of their husbands are working, and some are even in government, like police constable or construction contractor. And none of them are working, or only one working, which is a precarious occasional work. Why is this happening? This is a general trend. Okay, whether the marriage grant is there or not, there is this system of early marriages that is fundamental to the society. Either you get eloped, or the family get you married, or you will be forced to marry through some other mechanisms. So this is an obvious condition where this policy is coming and operating now. Marriage is anyway inevitable, either socially or let's say through a relationship or through a system. And then the government is coming and offering an incentive for that institution is a problematic situation. And a counter narrative from another side. She actually detached herself from the colony. I mean, we have like these kind of people's settlements in Kerala, and they reside outside the settlement intentionally to detach themselves from the social expectations of the colony. They are in the neighborhood, but they never assimilate with the colony because they will fall into one. And this conscious choice of staying outside the community is coming from her mother, who is a professional nurse. And her saying to the daughter is that whatever you do doesn't matter. Do study, work, and then decide of anything that you could think of in terms of a relation. Don't look at the community next door. In the same community, in terms of caste, is the same. Now, is that all? No. I told you that a sponsor would work if there is one sponsor as a male sponsor. It's in most of the case, it's a father. So those who made it through, there are 7 cases, 86 of all total who proposed, says that my father was instrumental in studying or to convert it into employment. And counter narrative, stalled cases, 6, were all husbands blocked after the marriage. Now, this is in case of education. In case of employment, the same trend follows, but it seems that it's in terms of employment, it's more decisive, that the marriage is more decisive on whether you continue to work or not. In terms of education, which is not so decisive because you could be studying. There are still some cases that are reported which are still studying after marriage, but that till the end of the program that you're continuing. But in case of employment, it's or yes or no. So the no is prominent. I'm running through without a bit of details, but I think I should save time. Now, intergenerational mobility through a qualitative lens. Okay, so we have also asked that to the beneficiary, that is generation 3, that Can you, let's say, think back and look at your mother and the grandmother? And what are the differences that you see from grandmother to mother to you? In terms of, let's say, schooling, a typical profile would be that the grandmothers are obviously coming from 50s or before 50s, the early India, where there are obviously literate or no schooling at all. To their mother, which is, let's say, those who have got married in 80s, 90s, are basically literate, educated at the school, primary schools most of the times, not secondary yet. A very few reach secondary. Secondary in India is 10th class. Higher secondary in India is 12th class. I grouped it as secondary for unanimous. Now the generation third is completing secondary schooling. And a few, 36%, move to higher education when there is a sponsor. In 80% of the cases of that 36% is coming from the sponsor, who is a male and instrument. Now, this is what Kerala development model explains in terms of metrics, that the literacy, primary education, school enrollment is great. Compared to rest of the India, North India or Eastern India, you'll get to see, okay, it's quite appreciative. But then, if you look at the conversion capacity of school education, it's quite similar. I mean, you don't get to have a different employment just because you are 10th pass or 12th or compared to 8th pass. It's all the same for the employment market today, or to make a social mobility today in the modern world. So changes are there? Yes, changes are there. But are the changes convertible? Highly no. Now, okay, those are all explained, and those explanations on the red is what I told you, that there is historical inequality in the grandmother's era. Then the Kerala model success stories in the mother's era, and in the current era, it's kind of a problematic secondary trap that you get to have educated till 18 and then you are trapped, there is no mobility, it will happen. Now with employment, it's even worse. With employment, this is a general paradox in India that, or even in back in when I studied development, I remember looking at it as that when Industrial Revolution happened, or Claudia Goldin says that when Industrial Revolution happened, women's labor force participation actually dropped against the previous scenario. Same thing, that the agricultural manual labor of women was very common in the grandmother's era. Everyone was working. In the mother's era, where we see these welfare policies are coming in, the government, political economy, all in operational. And there are programs that are coming, and I consciously put there is a Mahatma Gandhi Employment Guarantee Scheme in India, which is very predominant. And if you look at Kerala, 90% of the scheme beneficiaries are women. Not because 90% of the population of Kerala is women, because it's a very low tier job that men don't want to take. It's highly underpaid. It pays 200% lower than the current market wage that you get in Kerala. So men go for the 1,000 rupee job on a token per day, and women will end up having Manrega, which is 300 rupees per day job. Or Kudumbashri is a self-help group mechanism, which is funded through government again, which is again subsistence wage that you kind of get to work, but get to work according to the system's expectation, that you don't kind of negotiate with the family. Self-help group work in a way that you work in the neighborhood. You do some work, but you cannot negate to move to a big city or make it in a scale, no. And all of those things massively stepped there, so their mothers were of part of these things, if not massively, moderate. Now, the generation 3 is not predominantly working at all. And that's not incidental. It is expected that, as I told you, I am meeting them in their 20s. From 18 to 30 is the large age group that I see. They have now children and they can't work, negotiating the family care work. Now, they expected to be working. I predict that they will be working if I visit them after 5 years or so, when they pass their 30 and the children are into school, and then they go back to this Manrega or Kudumbashri or any other similar scheme. So what is happening illustratively, again, historical caste aligned jobs were there, though it was unequal jobs. Then the modern caste-aligned employment came that I told you how the social political economy narrated it. And then today, it's even modern caste patriarchy aligned casual employment. That is not there today, and you can have an employment tomorrow. Okay. Now the policy comes sharper, as I already told you that who collected? Father collected, 96%. Who decided on spending? Best known to father or parent or men in the family, so they spend it. Beneficiaries involvement, 81% of them kind of says that as a bride, I'm not involved in all of these things. I am a bride, I'm not the beneficiary, is identification. So the money is gender budgeted towards women, and the incidence as per principle should be on women. And it's not even incidentally on women, and it's on men. And then the decision, if there is a voice and agency on the money as the bride you're getting for your marriage, should be on you. The onus should be on you, and it's not. And most of the times, they hardly know what is the process it has underwent, who applied, when did you become eligible, and do you know that it can be postponed, or do you know that you can work, or you can get higher educated in parallel. I mean, all of these opportunities exist. For example, when I interview with the government stakeholder at the state government, they say, oh, Ashraf, no, they have other opportunities as well. It's just not, we are not pushing them into marriage. Say, you look at this scheme, there is a fund for their higher education. That is for hostel. This is for their migration. If they want to migrate into another country, and the government is still ready to fund for that education or upskilling or anything. Like there are 10 different funds that you can choose from, but nobody knows about it. How is that nobody knows about it is coming from? It is mediated by men.
How many more slides do you have? Because we need to give some time for discussion.
I think some 10 more slides, but I'll run through 5.
To summarize
because so yeah, I'll do that. It's easy. So why does this so happen? It's because it's men mediated. How men mediating? The first stakeholder in the policy should be a promoter, typically from the same community, but will be a contractual worker with the government office, and 70% of them are me. And how are these informations or decisions are shaped in the public sphere? It's through men's group who kind of sit at the tea shop or a bar or a pub or a toy shop where we discuss that, okay, government has this policy, that policy, etc., etc. And when you have a daughter to get married and the decision assimilates, so at the men's homosocial decision deliberations, not women's. So when controlling the information, alternative uses of money or funds that are available for education, enterprise are rarely surfaced. Nobody knows about it. And is male having an advantage? This has actually come from a feedback of my previous draft that I shared with somebody in III. So men has a clear path, which is better. That not many are utilizing it, but there is a clear vacuum of 5-6 years that you either convert yourself into a skilled labor or higher education. But the aspiration is lower because the exposure is lower, and which again align with the trade-off that the Kerala model has already people explained. Now, why many women are not in employment or not doing anything as of now when I interviewed, I already told you. The fertility follows almost immediately. The childbearing is there in 80% of the cases already. And linked to withdrawal, those with children, not studying and working, it connects up to 73%. Men's fertility is clearly later, around 4 to 8 ages window. Now, what are the three structures that the scheme sees through? The first one, even when there is no marriage, the aspiration is so low that the minimum profile welfare trap, that you have to stay poor to get welfare policies benefits. If you are, let's say, for example, if you have a first generation graduate from your family already, you're highly likely to be considered for the next welfare policy under the government. Not everyone gets welfare policies too. So you maintain the minimum profile so that you are kind of beneficiary of all the welfare policies that come through your life course. So in school, you have a scholarship. In marriage, you have a grant. After marriage, you will get also for a grant for housing, part-time. So to maintain that, you have to be a low profile one. Politicians moderate it highly. Well, with the politically aligned people, influential, caste people, and then it actually falls on women. One classic example could be that the scheduled tribe in India were not traditional Hindus by their, let's say, identity. But today, they are highly mimicking the Hindu wedding because the grant is now channelized through a proper wedding, not the kind of wedding that they used to have in the past. Now, what is the synthesis? Synthesis is that the policy clearly operates through caste, gender, and marriage as institutions and leaves them intact without questioning them. So it's not two women. It actually stalls education at school, and economic participation is generationally inverted now. And upward social mobility can only be a question if that is the case. Now, I call it as a vicious cycle of disempowerment in these communities that you hardly see somebody who is highly aspirational who come out on their own or due to some instrument like a father. Other than that, if the government is doing anything, which is actually the opposite. Now, does mechanism hold true at the state level? It can. So I pulled DHS and FHS data. I'm leaving all of this in the interest of time, but it's just summary statistics pulled for higher statistical weightage, and it holds independently across all the years also. And there are already studies that uses high scale macro data wherever available, but it doesn't talk about marriage or fertility associated, but caste inequalities in higher education or economic participation is already well established in economic literature based on data, but there is data limitation. All of these data have its own issues, and it's mostly at macro level. Now, if you look at the DHS summary statistics, you see the secondary education is a high cliff. Looking at the higher education is so low. And everyone is almost equal, kind of made a parity at secondary education in Kerala. All of these cases are from Kerala. But if you look at the higher education, there is clear asymmetry. If everyone attains a higher secondary education, and does it hold individually? This is a proof that it is only 2019, the recent data cycle. It is actually even defined, profound than the cumulated one. So there is a cliff of higher secondary, higher education. Now, higher education by age, the SC/ST and OBC general division, all across Hindus only, no other religion people. The gap is widening and it only converges towards 30s. Now, higher education by life stage, if you look at the marital legal threshold, 18 for women, 21 for men, you see the difference between women SC/ST and men SC/ST is highly different. Any children, fertility by age, you see the fertility is cumulated at the lower end of 20s. Fertility by life stage for men, it is 1/3 of what women's. Again, matching what was the age that we have already discussed. So, synthesis, the same shape. It replicate or it can replicate the same shape. Thank you.
Very good. We have about 10 minutes for this session, so we want to hear comments, questions.
I mean, one of the questions that I have for you is this SC/ST Marriage Incentive Act does not extend to the scheduled castes who belong to Christian as well as Muslim population, because it is considered that they have converted. So in that sense, that incentive is not there. And another thing is that intercaste marriages, which happen outside of the fold of Hinduism, also do not fall under the same set of norms. If you're marrying a Christian person, that does not fall. Or if a Syrian Christian marries to a Dalit Christian, that also does not apply to this. So, I mean, I wanted to know your opinion on this in a way that what I want to say is that we talk about Kerala model, but also echoing what Partha Chatterjee, Nivedita Menon says, that when there was an option for the post-colonial nation to not retort to the back caste norms and everything to be caste oriented, they had this option, but they did not choose for that. But the Kerala model could have chosen that, because they did have an option to extend it to, rather than believing in the larger argument of the state. So what is your opinion on this entire incentive? Because ultimately, I know you are on the front where you're saying it's entirely disempowering and limiting, but what do you think about if Kerala state would have extended it to a larger set of identities as well, rather than thinking from a limited sense of the identity?
I have actually thought about it, and it will be devastating, I think, because I intentionally said that the data that I've shown is on Hindus only. If you look at Muslims, the case is even worse. But the government is not just stepping in case of Muslims. Despite high amount, say, Muslims in Kerala are the number one in terms of receiving foreign remittances from global economies and having a lot of money, and they actually mobilize the community through the remittances only, not through the government funds. But then the women's plight is continuing to be the same. Now, if it extends to Christians, the trends actually hold compared to women. It's only relatively better to these lower scale communities. Now, there are also policies that actually look at intercaste or interfaith or other vulnerabilities and the marriage. Let's say, for example, the mother is widowed or the children is orphaned. Then there are other schemes also that government is actually funding when you are a vulnerable community in the backward caste. For that matter, most of this converted or intercaste Muslims and Christians fall into that category. If you are not the creamy layer, then also the cases are similar. Secondary data is obviously showing similar. And I think so far as of our field observations, the chances are highly similar. And I blame it on the political economic construction of the system in Kerala, that it maintained the hierarchy without its needs, basically.
Thank you,
You're going
Ashraf.
to give concluding remarks, so we'll hold him for now. Anyone else?
Okay.
First of all, thank you. This was a very insightful presentation. I would be very interested in understanding how the government was framing this incentive, this scheme, and how does that situate what was on their agenda, what was on their goals, and how does that situate with other issues of gender issues that Indian women face, and particularly lower caste Indian women face, such as child marriage, dowry, and the inadvertent issues that raises, such as female infanticide and feticide. So were these things on the agenda when it was giving incentives to women over 18, and hence we had all of these disempowering spillover effects that you spoke about? Or were these things not on the agenda at all, and it was just overall supposed to be a scheme for empowering women?
So if I understood the question correctly, are you saying that the agenda was different and it happened to be wrong?
I'm curious to know if that was the case at all, and did that end up did this have an effect on reducing child marriage by, was that? And
Yeah. Well, I mean, see, I'm also talking from a constraint of time that there is a well-established literature on motherhood penalty, marriage penalty, parenthood penalty, etc., which clearly says that if you have an incentive for marriage at 18, you're actually essentially avoiding child marriages to adult marriages. No question about it. It's correct. But then a state like Kerala had very minuscule amount of child marriages issues per se compared to many other parts of India. So child marriages was not an issue at all in the state. So why should we even address it?
Yeah.
That's first thing. And if at all there is any, there are specific caste, not an umbrella CST. There are specific caste, I'm not naming them, where the issues exist. Or if I have to name Muslims in terms of Islamic personal law in India, which is still operational, it still gives some concession for marriage under 18. So it has to be contested first before all of these communities in the name of marriage. That's one thing. And how caste is even practically put in place. I'll give you one more example from Kerala's context that government keep on sending, Devika actually argues about it, Jay Devika, if you're interested. Government put on more welfare policies that are disseminated through women or neighborhood. Okay, it's like the socially mobilized cleaning campaign, which is called Harida Karma Sena in Malayalam. Cleaning campaign in Panchayat that you kind of make up a consortium of women, and the women actually collect the plastic and other hazardous waste from all the neighborhoods and put it into Panchayat, and they get some token for it, as not a wage, but a token for doing this work and all of this. Well, it appears to be impressive. I see, you look at the profile of the women who are working in this category. You highly likely end up with having 90% of them are lower caste. Unintentional, policy never said that. But then the government introduced a system knowing that the system works in a particular way. Who will get mobilized? Those who are already not working in the white collar or industry or in service or anything, who are obviously the women who are sitting back. And you are kind of making them up in the lower tier again, thinking that they are doing something while they're actually inheriting what their ancestors were doing in the past in other shape. Yeah, I think I answered your question.
Yeah. I have a question, which is quite similar to Gayatri's. When was the scheme introduced? And when it was introduced, at least in the initial years, did it have any impact on the high school retention rates among girls in India and Kerala?
Okay, it's an interesting question, and I have no correct answer to it because I failed to trace the origin of the policy. It should be somewhere in 1980s, as in the fundamental rudimentary form. And 1990s, it has fragmented indications that it was even at the Panchayat levels, etc. In the current format, it has started somewhere along Kodoth, says that 2003-4 time, which is again not through gender budget. There was a thing called Women's Component Plan, WCP, back then in plan schemes of India, which was actually justified because it was a capped funding for women. You have to spend 10% of planned allocations under budget for women, and it was a dump. Now, when it transitioned into gender budgeting, the policy itself is speaking about how you sensitize public finance for women's economic empowerment, mainstream. It shouldn't be marriage assistance. Yeah, so the traceability is difficult, basically. Planning board didn't answer to the question when I asked when it was instituted. Yeah.
Right. So I think some things for me, I think you touched upon some of those questions as to bringing in a whole range of social indicators. You did talk about the economics as in it is targeting the group that is lower economic because if they have certain housing and so they're not going to be able to progress. But the fundamental principle of welfare scheme is to try and give the opportunity for the lower economic groups to allow upward economic mobility. One of the things I would like to see, which I hope you will continue to work on, is at least in the secondary analysis, trying to bring in the social and economic what's the word I'm looking for? What is the relationship between them? What is the correlation between them? Because just looking at it in one aspect gives you, at least what you are trying to say is that some of these schemes which were included as a process of enabling upward mobility of a caste which needed it, there are some mechanisms which are not working ideally. But then I think we have to try and understand the scenario more holistically. And I think bringing in some of the economic analysis into the social will give us better understanding of what's going on. And you have done some secondary work. So I think that can be built into that because it's not always possible to get that through primary, especially qualitative discussions. With that, I think you're using Chico's inherited concept. And I think, for me, I think when we talked, I talked about inherited or inherent. And in a way, I think both sort of could apply, but I think the inherited is a good concept to also to bring into this dialogue. So Jacob, over to you.
Yeah, I didn't know I was supposed to say anything. I was going to ask you some questions, but I will. But I will. Yeah, I will do both. I will just say that, you know, since we talked the first time, I think it's a really interesting question. I continue to think it's an interesting question in that there is a policy in a supposedly progressive state which has that reputation that you described from Sen and President Sen and various others, which is, you know, apparently well-intentioned, but clearly fails to sort of break a structural process of reproduction and inequality in this way. So I think that really is interesting. I think it's probably like a research agenda around policy. Thinking in terms of organizing the research around it, I think you have the qualitative paper now, at which I think probably, you know, probably worth writing it up as a qualitative paper. I don't know if I've already done that, but I think I'll come in a moment to the sort of quantitative complement, which we've already talked a bit about as well. But the qualitative one is interesting enough. It has a really clear story. I think a policy that fails to break the inheritance of inequality is a good frame. I would also link it to the conditional cash transfer literature a little bit, in the sense that this is clearly a large transfer that is sort of mysteriously conditioned on something it shouldn't be conditioned on, right? So you could either give it unconditionally, which is, we want to support young women. When they turn 18, here's a bunch of money. Or if you had the aspiration to really break this trap, and there was enough societal buy-in, you could make it conditional on tertiary education enrollment, which shifts it to the other way. Indeed, instead, you're making it conditional on persisting with the existing pattern of marrying early and fertility and so on and so forth. So even if you didn't want to go all the way to the other conditionality, why is it not unconditional, right? Why is it not just women, whether they want to marry or not? So there's a whole, I think, and there's the political economy for that, I'm sure, but I'm just saying that's another literature on conditionality and so on that you can link into a little bit. On that, a few items that were going to be my questions, which I think it might be helpful to have a little clearer. One of them is the exact nature of the economic targeting. So it's women above 18, and they must be getting married. But then you allude to, well, you don't build a bigger house, you don't. So it would be nice to know what exactly the economic condition, you know, is there a threshold that says people above this kind of estimated wealth or above this kind of income cannot get it? Because that wasn't clear to me from the presentation, but you did refer to it in your conclusion. So it would be nice to have it. You can address that in a moment, but I'm just saying, it'd be nice to have that clear. The other thing is, you know, when we last spoke about it, that hadn't come true, but now in the presentation it came through, this menu of options, right? So you'd say that these men sitting in tea houses discussing, well, there's a grant for this, there's a grant for that, but in the end, everybody goes for this one because it reinforces what they want to do. It reinforces the tradition. So documenting that very specifically in the paper, like what the other things that are available are. And obviously you can't redo your interviews, but if there was a way in which we could assess the extent to which they are known or not known by the population. Third point also on this qualitative paper, this is a pet peeve of mine. I you know, do please describe the sampling and how you did it, how you got to these 70 things, which would be informative. You know, it's going to be worthwhile anyway, but it's informative for the reader. To what extent is it representative of anything? Is it just, you know, complete sort of snowball thing just amongst a few people that, so, you know, bring that out quite clearly. And then should have stopped already, but just to say, I think the quantitative component to this, the counterpart to this, evaluating the policy, is still worth pursuing. Ruth just told me that you didn't get the AEQ grant, which is a pity, because that would have, I think that was what, the idea with that, but you should pursue other alternatives. For that, I think it'd be very nice. I was also gonna ask the question that was asked earlier about when the program started. Because if there was data about the cohort, suppose there was a sharp beginning, it sounds like there wasn't. But if there was a sharp beginning and you had some information on the cohort before and the cohort after, that already allows you a little bit of a comparison group. It's not a full control group. I mean, like you and I also discussed other alternatives, but some sort of comparison of this group with some, appropriate, not control. This is not going to be a control. But some comparison group, which allows you to say something about the actual impact would be very nice. But just to go back, I would really encourage you to look at the cash transfer literature, because there's also all the stuff on large grants, right? Shapiro and various other people, not only the small conditional grants, but the large one-time grants, and what kind of impacts do they have. So there's a whole other thing here that relates to that as well. So let me end there, but I think it's a policy that really deserves studying in the careful way that you're doing, and probably deserves both the qualitative and the quantitative complementing.
Because it's obviously attractive, because this can be classified as a large grant. And this is where once people know that this policy exists, this grant exists. And I think the fact that men do it for me is not the most important aspect, because in the family, they are the ones who are doing that. I think of it as division of labor within a family. It's their job to find the finances, at least at certain, so they're doing that. So for me, that argument, spending too much time on it, is not relevant really. So it's about understanding what exists there as a source of income for the family. And especially when marriages cost, people spend a lot, whether they have the money or not in India, which is a bane, which is a wrong thing people pursue, because that's the cultural and the social thing. So there's lots more work to be done, but I think you've been able to bring together some interesting things. So, and thank you to Chico, who's been also guiding through your time here. And unless you have any response you want to give?
I'll just add that regarding sampling, there is a whole systemic sampling that has been followed, and there is a lot of narrative. I skipped it in the interest of time. That it was all, one set of the samples were mediated through government mechanism from the institutes and people, and they assisted. And then we also did some snowballing and personal, which is random in that sense. And in describing in paper, hopefully I'll make it in terms of tables and descriptions and the locations, which are actually important. And I even did the temporal analysis for that matter. Not temporal, geographical analysis, that whether there is a concentration of those happening, which is again saying us, no, it's mainstream actually. It's not like a pocket incidents. So yeah, hopefully I'm a bit about the paper, and sorry for overrunning the time. Thank you.
So very good. Thank you for everybody for participating actively in the discussion. So thank you, Ashraf, and all the best for